In this lesson, I want to cover classes in Scala. Classes in Scala are similar to classes in other programming languages like Java and Kotlin and many other languages. The big difference is the syntax, and then there are other differences in terms of just a few different features here and there. So we'll cover this slide real quick. As with other languages, a class is a blueprint for an object, or said in the opposite way, an object is an instance of a class. And I should be clear here in these two lines when I'm saying object, I don't mean the object keyword, I just mean this definition here, that an object is an instance of a class. And you'll see that more as we get into here. But if you create a person class and then you have an instance of that person class, you refer to that instance of a person class as an object, and that's what I mean here. A class can have one or more constructors, so it can have a primary constructor, and then it can have secondary or auxiliary constructors. All of those constructors can take one or more parameters. The parameters can be identified as val, var, or have neither val or var. And when you leave off both val or var so that it has no markings, that makes the parameter a field within the class that's private to the class. And I'll show what I mean by that shortly. As with other languages, classes can have members, and members are fields and methods. And then all of these methods can be public or private, and they default to public. Classes can extend traits and other classes. You can only have one superclass, but you can mix in. We don't actually say we extend traits, we say that we mix in traits, so you can mix in as many traits as you want to. And if you happen to see the lesson on the Scala collections classes and specifically the vector class, I show how many traits are mixed into that vector type. And there's really quite a few, so we use mix-ins a lot. Finally, classes can have no markings, or they can be marked as open or final. And I'll show that as we go along. So let's start looking at Scala constructors. To do that, I'll just create a person class to get started with. And I'll give this person two attributes, a name, which is a string, and an age, which is an int. And that'll represent the age in years. And this is actually the entire class right now. So classes will get more complicated, but right now you can just think about this part as being the constructor. And these are the two constructor parameters, the name and the age. Hit enter, and that creates the person class. And now I'll create a person instance. So I'll just say val p equals person, and I'll call that Alvin, and let's say 33, and hit enter. And you can see that creates that instance. But now you see one problem with what I did there. So I'll do a p.name. So I want to access that name attribute, and you'll see I get an error, and it says name cannot be accessed, blah, blah, blah. And what that means is that name is basically a private attribute that's private to the class, and ages also. So what this means is if I go back here, right there, I can create a little bit more here inside the person class. So name and age are currently private to the class. I'm going to fix that in a few moments, but what I want to show you is when something is private to the class, inside the class, you can still access it. So I'm going to override the toString method and just do it this way. And I'll say $name is $age years old. Then hit enter twice. So that updates that class. And now I can go back here and say val. Well, I can just go back here and do that. So we'll use that again. And right away, you can see the output from that toString method. So again, my reason for creating this method right here was just to show that even if other people can't access the name and the age from outside the class, inside the class, we can access those fields right here and right here. Now, as it turns out, I rarely create classes this way. You can, there's certainly a reason to do that, but it's much more common to either make these fields val or var fields. So I'm going to create them, I'm going to change them to val fields. And then we'll go back, go back here, create that again. And you can see the toString method still works. But now that those are val fields, I can access these guys. And you see those right there. So as you see here, the val attribute makes these fields visible to people like myself, callers outside of the person class. We can access name and age. Now, the thing with val is it makes those fields immutable, which means they can't be changed. So now if I wanted to change it and say p.name equals to Al instead of Alvin, then we get a reassignment to val error, and we'd get the same thing on the age. So if I do p.age equals 34, you'll see the same message there. But that's exactly how val fields work. You can give them values right here, then you can access those values, but you can't update them. And the next thing I would do, and we would only do this in object-oriented programming, you would not do this in functional programming, but you can change these to var fields. And var fields can be mutated, so they can be accessed and mutated. So I'll go back over here. This time I'll just go ahead and type it again. Val p equals person. And we'll do Alvin and 33 again. And that creates that. So now I can access that field, and I can also change it like that. So now if I go back and do p.name, you'll see that it's now Al. And if I do p, that'll invoke the toString method, and you can see that it has Al is 33 years old. So it's a little bit of a summary. What I did was I first created this class here, and I didn't have val or var on name or age. And as you saw, that made these fields private to the class, and then I could access them inside the class, but people outside the class could not access them. And then the next thing I did was I enhanced the class, and I gave it this toString method right here. And to do that, you add a colon right here. And that's a way of telling the compiler, this colon right here is a way of saying, Mr. Compiler, the class isn't done. You're about to read some more. And technically, this guy here, this toString method, is called a member. So everything inside of a class is called members. And so you'll have fields and methods inside of a class. And this just happens to be a method. And then, because the outsiders could not access the name and age fields, what I did next was I added the val keyword to these two, and then I showed that you can access the name and age fields outside of the class. And then, because the val keyword makes those fields read-only, I also showed how to use the var field, which essentially makes these fields read and write. And finally, with the var fields, I showed how to create that class, I showed how to access the field, and then I showed how to update a field like this and like this. And then how to show the output of that toString method. So that's an initial look at class constructors in Scala 3.